Well, hello everybody and welcome to the GMIS digital series. This session is the conversion of industrial IoT with e-commerce platforms. I'm Declan Curry. I've been a journalist and broadcaster for more than 30 years and I'm delighted to be the moderator of this discussion today. The response to the coronavirus pandemic in business has accelerated two existing trends: using technology to work remotely and delivering products or services with minimal human contact or interaction. This session looks at how this can be expanded throughout business using a combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, and digitalization throughout the supply chain in industrial and production processes and in delivery networks. Our speakers are Helena Lisachuk, who's a global IoT leader for the business advisors and consultants Deloitte. She has 20 years experience in the industry. Maiser, who's the head of Competence Center for Future Business and the director of corporate foresight at the VDMA, that is the trade association for Germany's mechanical engineering industry. It speaks for over 3,000 companies across Europe. And Sunggy, who's managing director of the IoT consultants TMC based in Korea. He has first-hand experience running IoT, AI, and cloud businesses at Samsung and also at IBM. So welcome to the three of you to this discussion. We're grateful for your time and for the insight that you are going to share with us. Let's start with this point about how manufacturers might integrate industrial IoT and e-commerce in a meaningful way. Helena, if I can start with you, what does that mean to you? Why should companies be considering it? What's the advantage?
Declan, there are so many advantages, but I'll just maybe focus on one or two, especially the need for this integration became apparent in the past couple of months as we all lived through sort of a recovery, restart, and preparing to thrive and rebuild. So there is one key area and one benefit for, let's say, a large manufacturer when you have a seamless integration between your e-commerce, i.e. purchasing, product catalog capabilities, supply capabilities, and the actual IoT platform. Because what you can achieve by integrating the two is you will bring this end-to-end visibility, right? So imagine I'm building a car. Imagine I have a list of, 10,000 items in my bill of materials. Now, how do I ensure that all my orders are placed and planned accordingly? How do I see when what is being shipped to which factory? How do I make sure that my tier 1 suppliers, my tier 2 suppliers, tier 3 suppliers are all talking to each other and my production doesn't stop? I don't lose a minute of production time, and I also make sure my employees know when certain things would arrive so they could plan their work schedule. So this whole end-to-end, starting with supply chain visibility, and I always do this little thing because it's kind of a control tower all the way on top, you see it through. I think e-commerce just enables some of these transactions to go flawlessly and almost in real time. So I will pause and let others provide an opinion.
Thank you. Eric, I'll bring you in with your perspective from the mechanical engineering industry across Europe. What would the companies you know think of these ideas?
Yeah, so the story is for manufacturing, of course, you need machines and you need tools for the machines and you need material and supplies. Whereas there are big manufacturers, small manufacturers out there, the machine makers, especially in Germany, are small and medium-sized enterprises, right? So they are sometimes very specialized on certain markets, like welding, sheet metal, lasers, woodworking, textile, I don't know. So the industry is very heterogeneous. Accounts for like 1 million employees throughout Germany, so it's rather big, biggest industry segment in Germany. And of course, other than the big companies, you hardly see or hardly know those companies. And of course, what we call in Germany Industry 4.0, or what is called Fourth Industrial Revolution technology, or Industrial Internet of Things, is actually a pretty old thing, right? So it started in the 80s, called computer integrated manufacturing, and people tried to adopt to that already then, however failed because electronics were not as far as today. And yeah, so there is a whole thing, whole story you can tell, from logistics to running a factory and having those industrial Internet of Things inside a factory, but also outside a factory, as Helena told.
But the challenge would be the one that we pose in this discussion, which is the blending together of the best elements of IoT on one side, and then learnings from e-commerce on the other side. And of course, we've seen e-commerce and the technologies behind it be enormously successful for example, big name retailers. Now, your businesses are not B2C, they're not business to consumer, they are businesses dealing with other businesses. And for many of them, they will have a bespoke product that they don't make in large quantities every year. What are the learnings from e-commerce, from other much larger consumer-facing organizations that are useful, Eric, in your sphere?
Yeah, right. Of course, you can see those digital marketplaces also in the manufacturing space, right? So providing materials and parts, but also something like production equipment you can rent or buy. Factory capacity you can rent, people you can shift. But I think the most important thing is these IoT platforms, right? So a factory means connecting machines, and a factory means to digitalize the hardware, to have software on top of that, to provide additional services. And machine makers today are not only into providing the hardware anymore and plugging them together, it's also to really understand customers through the data, to add those new digital services. And this is where the B2C platforms come in, right? So they have a strong growth orientation, they have a strong customer orientation and agility. And this is where Corona now comes in. People who have those platforms and introduce those platforms also from a machine maker side have a built-in flexibility and can use that. Additional services also means additional business, right? So selling the hardware is not top of the list anymore for most of the people. Services is where the business goes, and digitalization has a big impact there.
And those are points that we can develop a little later in the discussion as well, but thank you for making them at this early stage. Sunggy in Korea, this is all about business working smarter rather than harder, using the best that technology can permit us to improve our productivity.
Right. Well, I agree with Eric, and I also want to go back to the Helena's point, right? When you have a factory that are making some consumer goods, consumer electronics, there are always been a challenges to look at or having a full visibility of your supply chains and manufacturing flows, outputs and all. But then what happens is last couple of months, the demand forecast has been extremely hard. In fact, the sales teams out there just started putting in demand forecast. It's pretty much like a random number generators, right? Because I think it was in February, they were just all got panicked. And then all of a sudden, April and May, they became so busy. They started putting a big number and say, oh, we need this, please make it more. So when that kind of situation happened like this, existing systems are really got stressed out. So now when we look at the lessons learned from the B2C, like consumer facing marketplaces or online or the e-commerce, right? They already have adopted a lot of different technologies in AI. Predictive analytics is just all over the place, right? So the demand forecast is just one of the key features there. Definitely that kind of lessons, that kind of same technologies, the backbone and algorithms that we can actually bring to this type of situation. But when it comes to the actually what's happening on the floor of factory, I think the data that's coming out of that is also very, very helpful when you connect them. In reality, but there are a lot of factories out there, they can claim that say our factories are a smart factory. Well, they have these all sorts of sensors around, they're monitoring, they're automated, all that stuff. But, however, they're not really fully connected to these type of the marketplaces for the B2B, right? So once they have this full visibility of their supply chains and what's happening on the floor, I think that will be a good chance that when they combine them, they can be a huge, huge benefit.
And Helena, this is such an important point at a practical level when you look at the industrial workplace, is that often the dots are not all joined up.
Yeah, absolutely. You are absolutely correct. And as Mr. Koo was talking, I was so triggered by one word, essentially the connected factory, right? Because I'm working with my teams now on switching the terminology from smart to connected, right? Because not every company is just localized to one element, right? Even though you have the best sensors and SCADA systems are talking to the edge layers, and you may even have an edge in a box sitting there, right? You may have that. Unless you are connected and not just amongst the network of factories for one company, I see the bigger value in connected platforms, not just with suppliers, but also with the customers. If you think about a heavy investment made in a complex machine, right? First of all, you want to be able to talk to your suppliers. So first you order things in time, you warn them about some quality issues, you do your forecast, demand planning, etc., but also your customers, because it's your pipeline and it's the balance. And it became so apparent, this whole right sizing of the ecosystem players in the end-to-end value chain. This is where the value could come from, right? Because you can look after, let's say, your smaller suppliers as a big enterprise to make sure they survive through difficult time and they plan for the future. But you also have direct relationship with your end customer, maybe not consumer, maybe a customer. I think the most interesting example is how aviation industry is dealing right now with the restart. Because it's not just the airplane manufacturers, it's their suppliers, it's the airliners, it's IATA of the world, it's a space agency, it's everybody working together trying to have the knowledge exchange and data exchange. And of course, AI will come into that, and machine learning, and all of these advancements will be part of this. But I think it's also a bigger framework and shifting the boundaries, right, outside of one unit.
And Sunggy, I don't know if this is something that you experienced at Samsung or at IBM, but how at a practical level do you get companies to join up those unconnected dots?
It's regardless of size or industries. I think it's a common challenge these days that the people understand the value of those, right? The combined or connected. However, a lot of the industries and then organizations still has the silos within the organizations. I mean, they're all good people, they're all good wills, but then there's a disjoint in the processes. Also, the way they manage it, the way they kind of see the visibility of end to end. It's a lot of challenges internally because just simply, this is not the way that people used to work. They used to work in their own silos, in their own boxes, and somehow believing in that the bigger organization designed the boxes together so that everything flows really well. Well, these days are kind of gone. Challenges are all over the places. So I think what we're talking here is pretty much technologies out there feasible. Sometimes it's already deployed. But I think the bigger challenge is internally, how do we redesign the process? How do we actually make people talk to each other, share the visibilities and data as their own?
Eric Maiser, you mentioned the Mittelstand, the network of small companies that is the such a powerful force in Germany's economy, a lot of those smaller and medium-sized businesses might look at the upfront costs of the technology that's required for something like this and think, this is just too expensive. We can't justify it. How are smaller companies within supply chains going to be brought into this particular technological conversion?
Yeah, so smaller and medium-sized companies not always have the money and not always have the IT people required to really set up own platforms. Some of them do, and this works from factory level up to things like where you sell meters of weld or something like that, pay-per-use models. Platforms that go up until bigger industries. However, the fact is that you have to collaborate also as machine makers. You are specialized to a single machine, and of course there are people having other machines right and left of your side. So it's really important to understand the whole process chain and really connect to that. Standards help with that, right? So to connect the hardware as well as the software, we are working on that. But to work in consortia to build things up like platforms is essential for the companies.
And does that collaboration include the larger companies perhaps assisting with the investment that's required?
Yes, of course, and this collaboration also includes, especially for platforms, also the big platform providers or the infrastructure providers for clouds, right? And for the SMEs, the question really is, where do I hook my business up? What can I really do with a platform? And where can I provide some extra value for my customer, the factory operators or the factory owners, and or do I have to do it myself,
Thank you. And Helena, that's the big sales pitch for all of this. It's the realization of the advantages that it can bring you, not least in the area of product innovation and delivery of new services. That is a big opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are 100% correct. And there is one thing with the SME market. There is unique pocket of expertise, but the topic of affordability is something that we always have to consider very carefully. So as these solutions have been put on a marketplace, hosted most likely by one of the hyperscalers, right? The affordability element and the key role, what I started seeing is some of the platform players, they actually take a stand on the price point to make certain things and certain services in the digital domain more affordable for the SME market. And they negotiate with the license holders of particular software components that are needed for the full solution to bring the point down and make it available, pay as you go, make it available as a service. And I think that's also almost kind of all of our shared corporate responsibility, because we need to, while the marketplace provides you the mean, leveraging all of the latest technologies, there is also a human side and a corporate responsibility side for the organizations to look after an important role that SME companies play in our economies or in our neighborhoods, and take that price point into consideration, because sometimes the market equilibrium does not put the right price on this. It's all about the value, and there is sometimes intangible value, right, for having a lot of the services and products being made by subject matter expert, by small medium enterprise a market segment. So and I think it's a huge space for innovation, absolutely huge space. I mean, I have all the stats, a lot of stats from different industries where the last best 10 ideas came from which market segment. It was always that startup that was bringing the 5 best ideas in a particular domain. So,
and in terms of that innovation and what it might lead to, what do you anticipate? What might we see?
Wow. Okay, I'm going to pull out my crystal ball now, Declan, right? Of course, of course. And there are so many sides to innovation. I definitely expect more and more collaboration, right? More and more ecosystems. I definitely expect more and more larger players stepping up to their social responsibility, because I think there are so many companies nowadays that are very much impact value driven to do the right things for the society and for people and for nature. I see more and more of these companies being more successful when they're true to their core values, and I think that's very important for all of us. And of course technology. Look, technology can do everything. Mr. Ku was talking through 5G line, which made me hugely jealous when I found out about it. Everything is possible. Technology allows you to do so many things, but it's about humans making the right choices and the organizations stepping outside of their comfort zone at times, right? And you know, breaking the barriers and being a bit more nimble and agile and start acting as somebody like a startup, right? A digital startup, for example. So there are so many things, but again, you know, my crystal ball is it has all the other colors, but you know, it's not all about that.
It has the color of optimism, which is what we're hoping for in these
big
difficult times. Eric, you mentioned at a practical level that the capturing of data and the usage of technology to deliver services in a digital manner was one potential area of growth for companies that embrace this.
Yes, right. So one thing that comes up is maintenance, right? So service of machines and tools is always what you have to do. I mean, those machines last very long, sometimes 100 years or longer. So maintenance is very key, right? And of course, what you do is like with a car, every half year you have to check your machine if it's okay or not. Or during production, you have to check it every hour or so. So predictive maintenance is one of those technologies that come into play with IoT, right? And it's already common for people to talk about that. It's already common wording. Something you can think about with, especially with artificial intelligence, is that instead of predictive maintenance, where the machine tells you, you know, my part will fail in about 2 weeks, there is something called prescriptive maintenance, right? Where your AI works like a doctor and tells you you must change that. And then on top of that would be self-organizing maintenance in the future sometime, you know, where the machine takes care of the maintenance itself. So for the hardware, like 3D printing or something like that, spare parts, and also for the software, you know. So AI can make it possible that a machine recognizes when software becomes unstable and then reprograms itself. But this is like, you know, biological systems almost, where a scar is healing automatically.
And importantly, in this moment when we are dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, when we are keeping people as far apart as is possible, certainly more than we normally do, but also longer term, the critical aspect is that these can all be done remotely, digitally. There is a reduction in the level of human contact that is required.
Yeah, exactly. So remote services is also something people talked about for a long time. And in those days, this is very useful. Yeah, you can do things like virtual or augmented reality. You can have collaborative robots, but something people are talking about now more is like we do in the office, is home office, is running a whole fab from home. So, and that needs very stable systems, very stable data flow, very stable infrastructure, but where the machine makers and also their customers did not talk about that like a year ago or half a year ago. Now with the crisis, everybody says, okay, it's so costly to really have all these masks and things introduced in a fab that automation on that level is probably something you want to invest in.
And so right at the heart of this, the critical element is data and the need, Sunggy, the need to ensure that the data is reliable, that it's of good quality, and that it is secure as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. Well, like just Eric said, right? If you have these large factory, let's say you're making TVs or refrigerators or mobile phones or anything, right? And you have these machinery from your suppliers, and it's all connected. It's a sensor, right? So now you can think of this whole factory operation is yours, meaning, the data of all is yours. But then, all the machinery providers have their own set of data from their own devices or the machines, right? Now, again, it's all disjointed. Don't want to share that. That's the problem, right? So the ideal case is, let's say you're the operator of the whole factory, right? And you bought these machinery, you bought these machines and other equipments to make your product, right? Ideally, you can basically create a small platform that you can actually share in a trusting relationship to better operations. It's simply to save cost, reduce the failures. I mean, detect the failure early. I mean, it's a whole KPIs of running the factories, right? But then you're getting into these kind of dirty fight in some cases. Say, hey, whose data is this? I don't want any data out of my firewalls or even the real world of factories, right? So I think this is we're getting into more of this kind of discussions. Regulations in each country is different. Your company policy is different. But when it comes to these, common goal, working together with your suppliers towards the common goal, the higher efficiency of your factory, period and full stop. You figured it out under the regulation of that location of the government, right? You figured out the best way to share the data, use data, so that you can actually better outcome of all the operations. I think it's a very easy for me to say like this on this type of settings. Every day is a super sensitive fight. But again, I mean, this is the challenge that we're getting into and more. But I think there's always solutions or answer to that question when you have a trusting relationship with your suppliers.
And Helena, these are the aspects that need to be addressed by businesses, by manufacturing businesses when they look at this. They're looking at verification, they're looking at standardization, and you're looking at transparency as a way of solving this.
Absolutely. So transparency is very important. Reliability is important. Trust, digital trust, right? So without going too deep into blockchain, but the trust and transparency is important. But I have a slightly different view on regulations because I think many customers are looking at it as this is an impediment. But there is another way to perceive this, right? So very famous GDPR. Everybody knows, very well aware, right to forget. You had to do so much change, additional encryption layers, etc. But if you look at GDPR, if you look at some other regulations, and you think about it, hey, it's actually my guide rail, and I'm going to actually innovate and create new solutions and implement them, but I will just use that as one of my requirements into how I do this and how I enter the market and how I grow my enterprise. It actually gives more clarity than constraint. So and I think for the data use, we created this framework, and it was a very interesting study. So if anybody wants to guess how many laws are applicable to when you just take a driver driving in a connected vehicle, passing the data, how many ecosystem stakeholders are impacted and eligible to do something with this data, and how many laws impact that just in the Netherlands, forget Germany, I'm talking about double digits, right? So So it's double digits on both sides, and we only know GDPR, but there are another 35 laws to consider, right? So I think to some extent, it's kind of like sharing the experience. And if there is a will, there is always a way to do this in a very compliant way if you think about it from the beginning. And you basically make it part of your design, embed it into your design, and it becomes much simpler.
Yeah, maybe one word to that. It's like with protectionism in the marketplace, right? So keeping your own data is always easy, but it's like with keeping your marketplace in your own country doesn't help you on the long run. So we called it data protectionism, and everybody understands directly what that means, right? So sharing data. You don't have to be naive, but if you want to do artificial intelligence, you need training, you need a lot of data, you have to share data. So if you want to tap into that, you have to avoid data protectionism.
But Sunggy, this is also an issue of management of risk, because Sunggy, there is an extra risk here, and we've seen it in other cases as coronavirus has swept around the world, that as more people work remotely, there is an increased risk of cyber attack. And that can be managed, but the vulnerability is now there and is greater.
Yeah, well, back to just a quick one point, back to that GDPR. I mean, I've gone through that. Literally that like 5 months was fire drill every day. Because it's just they had a time bomb on it, right? But I agree with you. I mean, once we gone through that, once it just started, right, then I think we have a much better framework to work with. And ideally, right?
Well, let me ask the question another way. What restrictions should be imposed on manufacturers when they think about data retention, data capture, and data use?
Well, I think that the restrictions are already enough, actually. I don't want any more restrictions, to be honest. But back to your first question, right? When we started working from home or working from the remote places more and more, and you basically give more access to more people, to more data, from somewhere that you don't even know, right? Because you know what's in the office building, but when it comes to the people on the run, I mean, it's just hard to manage it, right? But I think this is going to be quite a bit of the challenges when it comes to the security people, right? I'm not talking about the security guard out there, but the technology, again, my belief is the technology is out there, right? VPNs and encryptions and all the key mechanisms from the IT technology perspective, it's there. It's there. You just need to actually deploy it, manage it quite tightly. Because as you have more and more employees, just accessing the system of the company from the remote sites where you probably don't know. There could be a coffee shops or cafes out there, restaurants and libraries. You never know, right? So other than that, I mean, nothing changed from that perspective. But then now I think we really want to focus on how do we actually control and have a visibility overall from these data flows. Now, it's not only office building, but the people outside of the office building. But then, like Eric mentioned, people are now accessing to the factory floor, operations of factories and other facilities out there, which is quite sensitive, right? Therefore, when you talk to these IT security people now, their headaches are just a more broader spectrums, not like last mile or not like the inside the building. So I think it's just a broader spectrum to look at as a holistic security feature. So regulation, I don't need any more, but I think our security guys need to work a lot more to have a full visibility when people are connecting from all over different places.
Okay, thank you. I know we have a separate discussion as part of the GMIS digital series on cybersecurity, so people who are interested in that area can get even more profound observations on that from that particular panel discussion. In this discussion, I think it might be helpful if we pick out one or two aspects where the customer at the end of the line will notice a definitive improvement in the quality of the product or the service if there is investment along the supply chain, along the delivery network, in these two different aspects of converging technology. And Helena, I know that you have an interest in that you have identified the whole area of increased customer specification, personalization is something that becomes more of greater possibility as time goes on.
Yes, absolutely. I think the whole need for personalization, it's just part of the human nature. If the customer is a consumer, there is definitely the need for personalization. I don't want to buy the same thing everybody else buys, unless it's just a glass of water, right? Because for everything else, you want to differentiate, right? Well, companies and enterprises are no different. So if you think about aftermarket as a segment, right? How many aftermarket modifications to the goods that were being invested into, servicing these modified goods. And I think the choices and the complexity and variety of things, it makes me think how, you are online and you personalize your experience and how much is possible on these e-commerce platforms that are really targeting B2C. And they've been talking about this personalization for the past 15 years. So they learned already. They know how to recommend. They know how to combine. So bringing that experience towards more industrial space, towards aftermarket, making that digital, services aftermarket. I think, Eric, you mentioned some of the equipment is like 100 years old. Yeah, well, probably because it's very expensive and it's really tailor-made, right? So a small, medium enterprise is not going to make that level of investment again. So things like the service aspects, there are so many things that just kind of come together. And logically, the Internet of Things enabled platforms that focus on service and the field workers and the aftermarket could learn a lot from the e-commerce models in terms of learning, personalization, customization, distribution, etc. So, yeah.
Eric, I'm sure a lot of the businesses you speak for will say, well, we've been doing bespoke services for our products for our customers for a very long time. We know about this already.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing that comes to my mind when you talk about 100-year-old machines and individualization is, of course, machine makers had to think about how to do lot size one things, right? So individualization on the production level with machines that are able to adopt to certain things. So that was actually the initial idea of self-organizing production that we said, okay, so machine knows here comes a workpiece that has to be painted red, and the next one has to be painted green. And that was actually the initial idea of having all those things. And of course, I mean, if you want to make a 100-year-old machine fit for the future, you have to think about how to hook up like internet capability and all the things we talked about on a hardware that is pretty old. So refurbishing old machines makes totally sense also in the view of sustainability, right? So you don't want to throw it away, you repair it, you make it fit for the future with hooking up to internet capability. And this is actually something machine makers have to think about. It's the producer says, look, I need lot size one. This is something I want. You have to make it happen, right? So this is something machine makers have to think about all day, yes.
The argument you're setting out here is a case for investment that is cautious.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's always nice to sell new machines, right? But and always sell a lot of new machines. But mostly for the machine makers, machines are individual to each customer, right? And that's why they are pretty accustomed to like having different people asking for different things on the machinery, so that they always have to hook up different things on their basic machines. A machine made for Europe or made for the US looks a lot different than a machine made for Pakistan or Vietnam or Tanzania, right? So, and you have to adapt to those different needs of the customer very much. And this addresses digitalization as well as the software and the hardware integration.
Let's get some final thoughts from each of the three of you, and I'll bring you back to the starting point of our discussion, that in the aftermath of coronavirus, there's going to be an increased demand for processes and systems that have reduced human contact. There's going to be greater demand for more remote control and more remote work. If that becomes the new normal, Helena, who wins and who loses? Who are the gainers from this?
If that becomes the new norm, more advanced digitally organizations before COVID happened will be still in the category of losers, because they didn't necessarily, of winners. They didn't have any sort of setbacks, so they only learned and they got better. I would say the other winners would be companies that are going into the journey of digitalization at a very rapid pace. They don't have kind of constraints of not being agile or nimble. So I would say innovative type companies will win, because it forced them to think outside the box. In 3 months, you could come up with 100 fabulous ideas and implement half of them by now. So that category of companies and organizations would definitely win. And I think who would lose is people that pretended that nothing happened. But let's also realize there are certain sectors that are impacted, but the same sectors that had the highest impact actually embraced digitalization and are moving as fast as possible. And for them, it's not just a game of differentiation, it's also a game of survival. But again, I think it's just about adapting the modern way of thinking within the constraints that some investments are already made, and those investments need to be preserved. But it's also the cultural movement towards adapting and embracing and trusting more digital technologies.
Thank you. Sunggy, who wins, who loses?
Well, I agree with Helena. I mean, winners going to be the one, regardless of the size, big or small, long history or just a startup. I think the winner is going to be a nimble adapter. You have to think fast. This thing, we never expected. It hit it hard, it hit it really fast. Therefore, I think to win this type of environments, you gotta be fast. You gotta think fast and move fast.
Thank you. Eric Maiser, last thought from you.
Yeah, so winners for sure will be those companies who have the right mindset, right? So it's been a volatile and uncertain and complex world out there for a long time already, and Corona will not be the last distraction here. So corporate foresight and preparedness is something you want to install in your company, right? So you don't have a crystal ball, you don't know what the next pandemic will be. You have to install something like a mindset for looking into the future no matter what comes. I always say it's like learning to ride the waves no matter how big the waves are and when the waves come. You have to be a surfer. You have to be able to ride those waves of change, and then you are the winner.
Thank you very much. I know those who've been watching and enjoying this discussion will want to join me in thanking your three great speakers. They were Helena Lisachuk, Eric Maiser, and Sunggy Ku. Thank you so much to the three of you for sharing your time and your expertise and being so generous with your insight today. And I want to thank you for watching this GMIS digital series. I'm Declan Curry. The next update will be here next week.